Hello everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, also good evening, depending on where you are. So let me give you a warm welcome to the third webinar of our series Going Beyond Context Matters. I will now leave you with Vanesa, who will move this webinar forward, and she will introduce the agenda and also our guest speaker today. So Vanessa, when you are ready to jump in.
Yes. Yes, hello. Good afternoon. Good morning to everyone. I'm sorry I had a slight internet glitch and got disconnected for 2 minutes. Hope everything works well now. So as Leandro was saying, welcome to our third webinar in our series to share what we have been learning this year about context and how it affects the production and use of knowledge in policy. We are pleased to have here today Carolina Trivelli. I formally introduce her later on. She's the former Minister of Social Development and Inclusion of Peru, but we are bringing her role due to the story she has to share, but she is doing a lot of things right now. So we'll let you know more about what she's doing in this field in a few minutes. Let me briefly share with you the agenda that we have for today. I will very lightly go through the study that is a background of this series for those who are joining us for the first time. And then I will explore the specific dimension that we are relevant for efforts promoting the interaction between research and policy. I will talk a little bit about the main sub-dimensions that are usually related to culture and that we found that they heavily influence the use of knowledge in policy. Then we will ask Carolina to join us in and tell us her story about how culture played a role within her ministry, and we'll together interview her today. We will welcome your questions through the chat so that everyone can have the opportunity to interact with her. And of course, I'll close up with some conclusions and tell you about the next webinar. Okay, that being said, very briefly, Politics and Ideas and in us embarked on a study to better understand the role of context in the interaction between knowledge and policy. And as why we to do this, it was because we frequently found that researchers, practitioners, donors were discussing and were always mentioning the large role that context has on the use of research in policy, but we generally talk about it very broadly, and we found that there was a good opportunity to better understand and decipher how exactly context plays that role. And when doing so, we went through a large body of literature and we interviewed a lot of policymakers in different countries, mostly developing countries. And we also decided to use context or use the definition of context as the specific space where the practice of producing research and using research in policy takes place. And the natural context, the natural setting where that happens is the state agency. So for us in this series and in our whole study, context is what happens within each public institution. And of course that we cannot isolate these state agencies. As you can see, our framework, each of these state agencies, which are depicted in gray circles, are interacting among themselves and also are in continuous interactions with other very relevant stakeholders in the use and production of research for policy. And within those state institutions and within this interplay with other state and non-state stakeholders, of course, there are some main dimensions that emerged as the most important areas that we need to look at to understand context. These 6 dimensions are context, which is in the larger picture and setting with large forces, economic, social, political forces that set the stage for the use of research in policy. Then we also, of course, have all the various and very different type of relationships that each state agency has with other state agencies, and, as I was mentioning, with relevant stakeholders who produce and use knowledge themselves too. That's the second main dimension. The third one is the one which we will focus today on, culture. And then we have the organizational capacity of each state agency, the management and processes that also influence the way research is used and produced on a daily basis within the state agency or in relationship with others. And of course, other types of resources like time or budget. So today, our third webinar centers on culture. We have 2 previous ones. Those interested, you can find us in our website. We have the recorded versions. And we have, of course, 3 upcoming ones. Our decision was to spend some time in each webinar focusing on one specific dimension. And culture is our focus today. For those who aren't aware of where we are sharing all this information, let me tell you that we have this conceptual framework where we clearly explain and give practical and concrete examples of these dimensions within the conceptual framework. And we also produced a very practical paper where we share concrete practices that are emerging in different places to improve the link between knowledge and policy. I see here that, can you hear me well? I see here a message from Annapurna. I hope you can all hear me well. The practical paper then and the conceptual framework have been synthesized in an interactive product, which is what we will be looking at today. I will be navigating this product with all of you, and you can, Leandro will share also the link. So within that interactive product, you can both access the information related to the conceptual framework and all the implications that are in the menu above, that are also organized according to different types of users. So today, yes, can someone tell me if you can still hear me well, because I don't see any messages? Yes? Okay, thank you, that helps. So today we have a very appealing, at least for me personally, a very appealing dimension to explore, which is culture. Culture is the way things are done within an organization. It has to do what I like this very simple definition that says that culture is what the organizations wants to see happen, right? It's like the assumptions that people within each organization have around how they should think, behave, and discuss and find solutions within their institutions. And I also like very much this quote from Peter Drucker from some years ago, where he said, "Culture is strategy for breakfast." Why is that so, right? Well, I think that in our case, and for many of us who are working within the field to promote a better interaction between research and policy, we generally have projects and plans which are, we need them. Of course, we need to have some strategies and we need to lay out a rationale for our efforts and our intentions and to get ourselves organized and to allocate resources. But if we forget the natural setting where those actions will take place, we will probably end up with a lot of surprises, and many times not so positive surprises, because there is a whole world of informal rules or of informal expectations that account for what is called culture and that heavily influence what happens and how the same plan could yield very different results in different state agencies and in different interactions between state agencies and other stakeholders, depending on the organizational cultures. I can imagine that most of you can think about how this plays out within your own efforts. So if culture is strategy for breakfast, because if it plays such a large role that the best thought and very carefully designed plans turn out to be very different stories, we need to go back and understand which are the sets of values and beliefs, what are the motivations, right? What are the incentives of people that end up telling the final story. And while I say this is very important to take into account culture, it is very complex as well to find out which are the ways to work with it, since we're speaking about informal rules. These are, I mean, culture is not written in a document, of course. And sometimes there's like a large gap between written documents, like written mission statements and visions and objectives, and what are the real day-to-day and final objectives that drive people's energy and drive the resources and set the stage and influence what we do every day. And since they are informal and kind of sometimes invisible and implicit, it's much more difficult to lay out a plan for this. It's more like you need to develop a special intelligence to build upon what culture can bring in favor, and sometimes how culture can become, or some aspects of the culture can become real obstacles for the promotion of research in policy. So we'll talk a lot about it in a real setting, and Carolina will tell us a real story. But let us delve a little bit more deeply within our framework about the subdimensions, what we have found in the study we did about what are within culture the forces that in general play an important role in how culture frames and influences efforts to promote the interaction between knowledge and policy. As you may see here, I will navigate within the interactive product that I was mentioned. I will navigate culture. I have already talked about what culture is. It is very important also to highlight that in most cases, the organizations have different cultures within themselves. Of course, this is even more evident in state agencies, where sometimes there might be even conflicting cultures, conflicting groups of or teams that do have different worldviews, how things should be, different expectations of what should be rewarded or not. So this is not a homogeneous story. There are sometimes within state agencies, as I was in, different groups and different organizational cultures, and of course that because also there's continuous change within state agencies. Every time an election takes place, there's like a shock, a kind of cultural shock within each institution, where a new cohort of leaders will probably bring in some values, will change incentives, etc. So it is very important to bear that in mind, to add another layer of complexity. We need to understand that this is not a very clear and defined it's not a very clear and defined culture for each state agency. Okay, so can you, I see the screen there. Can everyone see the screen? Yes? Okay, so let me check. Yes, can you, I see here the chat, can you, I see this as the screen in the, as you would be able to, if not, please let me know. Oh, not the screen? Okay. Let me go back. I'm sorry about that. I see it. My screen sharing tells me that you are seeing it, but that there's a problem there. Let me go back to you and try to. So Okay. Let me try once again. Sorry about that. The technology is not working well because I offer that I see my screen, and when I see my screen, I got a little screen of your screen, and it showed that you were looking at it. If you no, it's not allowing. Okay, so as I talk, I will try to open it again. I'm sorry about that. If you are invited to look at the link. Maybe that helps a little bit. And if not, I'll continue talking about the subdimensions of culture. Sorry about this technology glitch. So within the subdimensions, one of the most important ones, and I'm probably all aware of how these play out in the efforts to promote the use of research in policy, is our values and beliefs, right? There is a set of shared beliefs and values among policymakers and bureaucrats within state agencies that influence mainly which are the public policy issues that are paid attention to, which are found to be the most relevant and in need of addressing them, and also the framing, right? The general framing and the way at public policy issue is understood and framed. And this is many times linked to policy narratives, the prevailing policy discourses that are circulating within other relevant stakeholders, the way citizens and important groups, depending on the policy issues, are talking and perceiving that policy issues. And there are a set of values that are connected to those. And contrary to what our rationality would say, this set of values and beliefs many times play a role in disconfirming any sort of new evidence or knowledge that plays a role, sorry, any sort of evidence that contrasts or reveals something that would question our current set of beliefs and values. So it is very difficult in many settings to present recommendations or findings that are contrasting or are at least challenging in some way the prevailing beliefs and values of a policymaker or a group of policymakers. This set of values and beliefs really affect two levels. This one that I was mentioning that has to do with how each public policy issue is framed and understood, and you can really, I mean, one clear example that that we can think about is, for instance, religious beliefs, and how many times within public policy issues where religion plays a large role, of course, that regardless what a piece of evidence and or research may bring out, people, policymakers will be heavily influenced by their setting, their set of beliefs and what tradition has brought forward for a long time. So history, tradition, religion are part of the sources of some values and beliefs that influence these public policy issues. Another level, important level, in which beliefs and values also bear weight, has to do with the overall perception of what knowledge can bring into policy and how knowledge can shed light into policy decisions or not. For instance, there are state agencies where values around how policymakers should work have a significant influence in the possibility of some of them bringing forward evidence to the public policy discussions and decisions. Sometimes there are cultures, public policy cultures, where what is mostly valued is to see people working and doing things, the typical doing cultures where thinking and discussing and bringing, like, let's go to do some research is perceived as something that it's sometimes even a waste of time, right? And those who are more into the analytical tone and want to do more, explore with research, or want to have discussions around some public policy issues, are perceived like academics or people that are really not doing things. And what is valued is that you go on doing things, performing activities, resolving, and not discussing or even questioning some beliefs and values that have been there for a long time. And of course, here again, the role of bureaucracy and the many times those people who have been around and have been used to doing things in some way also is an important factor. Another important subdimension has to do with within culture, has to do with two subdimensions that are connected, are incentives and motivations. I'm sure that when I was talking about culture, most of you have thought about them, right? The difference between incentives and motivations is that incentives are external. They are external rewards or drivers, many times devised by the state agency structure, and sometimes even some are brought new incentives that are brought by policymakers, or a new, thanks for that, Leandro, yes, they can see them here better. While motivations are more personal and intrinsic, the personal drivers, are the reasons, the personal reasons by which each policymaker and each policymaker or bureaucrat is driven to action and to make decisions. And within incentives, external incentives, let me highlight that, of course, that there are some of them that are very difficult, that are already embedded or have been there for a long time. With, for instance, a clear example has to do with remunerations and salaries are not very easy to change, but of course are very clear incentives in terms of using or not researching policy, when there is a culture of also evaluating and having performance indicators, and those performance indicators are linked with salaries and remunerations, and which appreciate the use of research, and which bring on, and when people are evaluated, they are evaluated in terms of how much they have used or brought forward evidence to base their decisions. There will be more, of course, willingness to use and to behave in that way. Very important external incentive, and that we cannot deny, is our electoral incentives. When there's a perception that when a decision that is really based on solid and very important evidence, but would go would mean recreating a whole public policy or canceling a program with a large group of beneficiaries that would be not receiving that benefit. The electoral incentives and the electoral calculation is very important there, and I'm sure you've heard a lot of stories by which the most well communicated and well presented piece of evidence has had to be disregarded because the electoral costs of making that decision were too high. So electoral incentives, salaries, promotions, training, sometimes the capacity or the ability to get extra support can bring in new chances, right? Maybe if you're helping policymakers to do better some research or to better assess the research that comes in from external stakeholders, and give them the skills, and leadership is giving the signals that they are going to be rewarding, and they are looking for their staff to bring them with better evidence, because they have better skills to analyze that evidence. Of course, that people will be more naturally inclined to use it. And regarding when you're thinking about internal motivations and personal motivations, competence is a very important one. The perception and the ability to be to present and to bring forward something that is appreciated by the others, in this case, evidence, and internal perceptions of others, of a policymaker bringing value and being perceived as a solid and credible person whom brings value to the table, also is a very important motivation. If people don't feel that they are appreciated in this role, the chances to bring in evidence are lower. And finally, ownership here with the motivations. If policymakers have been part of the design or have had some sort of participation in the production of a piece of work, of course, that their motivation to put it forward, to channel that piece of evidence throughout their policy agency or with other state agencies will be much bigger. And all of this, of course, closes up with the openness of change. When a culture has more margin to appreciate chances to become better, when there's some sort of critical thinking that leadership is willing to admit some sort of failures, when leadership is more honest and candid and wants to have a conversation about what is working or not, or what external stakeholders are bringing that are really questioning the way things are being done, of course, that this openness to change opens up a lot of opportunities for research being used. So these are the main sub-dimensions, and I'm sure we'll be more interested in learning about how they play out in a real story. But since culture is strategy for breakfast, and everyone here working within organizations for sure has seen these sub-dimensions playing roles in our work. In this case, we're talking about specifically the production and use of knowledge in policy, but in our day-to-day basis, of course, that this has a lot to do with the way we work. I think there's a lot of room there to think about culture and maybe also explore a little bit about emerging practices or how others can tell us stories about how they've done and perform cultural change to create state agencies that are more open and ripe for a good use of research and policy. I hope this has been a good introduction to culture. I'm sure it's a complex issue, and you might have some comments or questions. And I also want to introduce Carolina in a little while. But any specific questions or comments you want to do about this first part, which has been a little conceptual, but I try to illuminate it also with very practical factors that we are all aware about. You're invited right now to comment or make questions before we go to the second part of the webinar. So chat, please, then. Let's see if anyone. I see someone typing there, Annapurna. Please don't shy away. It would be interesting to have some reactions from you about culture. I think it's a field where everyone here has something to add on, or questions, right? I shared a lot of a synthesis of what we read and found, but I have more questions about culture right now than answers. Yes, Annapurna, I think that the concept of culture, I think that organizational culture is applicable to every country, and every country has like a large heterogeneity of organizational cultures. And as I was saying, also within some state agencies, and of course, the larger and the bigger, the more chances that different and even sometimes opposing cultures may emerge. And the way this has to do that there's always a way when people enter. The best thing to think about is that when someone new comes into an organization, besides learning about the formal processes and their formal job descriptions and what is officially expected from them, they spend a lot of time and energy in socializing and incorporating the informal rules from their peers and from their superiors on what is expected from them, what is valued or not. And this is like human nature. here I would say organizational nature in this case. Let's see other comments here. Clara is saying that we can see, yes, that you find it difficult to incorporate this in practice, right? What this really means within a public institution and where trust is key. Yes, Clara, here I would really bring again forward, I mentioned it, but not that clearly, the role of leadership. Champions, real leaders, usually have the ability and the charisma to read the culture, to understand what are the set of values and beliefs or the incentives and motivations that are working towards and that are supporting the use and the production of research and policy, and what are the ones that are really deterring that, and that where there could be some space for change. Of course, that no one, not a sole leader, can change a whole culture, especially within state agencies that have years of work in some way. But I would say here that the work within culture in practice has to do with partnering with champions of change and people who are really politically and culture savvy, and that can, as I was saying, really assess and read what's out there and build up new ways and new devices and new values and bring on new values, and gradually, with the help of others, create a set of incentives and motivations, or maybe it's just like opening up to change and then co-detecting those incentives and motivations that could be worked upon in the concrete ground. I see here Ty Will asking about how to encourage more openness to change, especially from superiors. Yes, again, I think this ties nicely into what I was mentioning about leadership. I think it's very difficult to change a whole organization culture, at least a large part or a significant part of a culture, without the engagement of superiors, because the best personal motivations are not enough, right? You can have two or three or a group of really committed policymakers who are intrinsically and personally very convinced about why and how to use evidence in their policy field. But if superiors are really against that, it will take a long path for them to convince them or find about drivers. And this, of course, again, has to do with how electoral incentives and other external incentives could gradually open up opportunities, or which are the external, maybe here, again, when it's not working for superiors, maybe find out external stakeholders that can gradually show up, that there could be some external incentives for those superiors to listen to a group or to address a specific policy issue using some set or body of evidence produced by different stakeholders, because there is an external incentive. Otherwise, I think it's really difficult. Julie here is asking about if culture can transcend organizations, right? Yes, people that move between the role of researchers and decision makers within government, can they influence culture within the entities they find themselves at any given time, or do they have to conform to the organizational culture they find themselves in? I think that, yes, this is a good question. I think that cultures have, organizational cultures have cross-fertilization opportunities. And I can think of, for example, about the case in Colombia, where this revolving door between think tanks and government agencies is very strong. And there's like a large cohort of qualified persons who are researchers and policymakers in some stages working within the research world. And I think Carolina personally would be a good storyteller about this, like moving from different type of organizations and cultures. And I think there's cross-fertilization opportunities to bring on some new values or some incentives that have but in general, people need to conform. Of course, you cannot come in and just like recreate a whole organizational culture from scratch. What you can do is to kind of find where there are these fertile where is this fertile soil, because there's some degree of discomfort on something is not working well, and you can bring in some new ideas or some new values or a new belief, or create a new incentive that can gradually make a change in the organizational culture. So yes, I think that there's the culture can, I mean, you can take pieces of culture that you like to other organizations and bring these seeds. When I'm thinking about cross-fertilization, of course, it's about little seeds, and there are little changes that can be planted, but a whole big change needs to have the synchronicity of more than one person bringing in new ideas, and enough fertile soil, or enough a level of crisis and discomfort so large that the need for change cannot be longer denied. So that's where maybe there's also an opportunity of change. Yes, we're all looking forward to Carolina. So I see that there are no more questions coming in. I think I think we've have here a dimension where a lot of dialogue and interaction and exchange can take place, and we look forward to it. We plan to continue working on all this, but let's now invite Carolina to the stage and tell us and share with us her story. You'll have opportunities to make questions to her and make comments around culture after listening to her as well. So we'll continue chatting, but let me first of all thank her for her willingness to join us today. Carolina Trivelli is a senior researcher at the Institute of Peruvian Studies, the IEP, and the chair of the Bacchus Foundation Board and the Peruvian Digital Payments Director right now in Peru. She has been Minister of Development and Social Inclusion between 2011 and 2013. Very active, I think she's a real champion in promoting evidence in policy, and she will tell us today the story about the ministry, and with a special focus on culture. But as you can see from this short bio, and I can also tell you that from her long bio, she has done work in different type of organizations and settings, and the richness of her presentation today will surely bring forward what she could learn from different organizational cultures and agencies, not only in the state or the public policy realm, but also sharing experience from being a researcher, working with research institutions and civil society organizations. So great to have you here, Carolina. Thank you again. And now the stage is all yours. We're all eager to listen to your story.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you all for the invitation and for your time. As most of you may not know, I was appointed as Minister of Development and Social Inclusion in Peru in 2011 in a very special situation, because it was the creation of that new sector. The objective of creating this new ministry was to have in only one place all the main social programs in the country to address poverty and vulnerability, and to allow one institution to be the leading coordinating agency to really help the poorest people in the country. So it was a great opportunity, and it's a very good example to really discuss this issue about culture. Because as a new entity, you know, the upper part of this new ministry was formed by a new team that was coming in order to create this ministry. One of the important and distinctive features of this new sector was that since it included a general direction on evaluation. Actually, one of the deputy ministers was in charge of policies and evaluation. So the idea of including evidence and research results and sound evaluation systems within this new institution was key in shaping what type of institutions we want to have. And the objective of all of this was showing that you can have social policies done with high technical standards with high evaluation standards, and that you will be using evidence to really help to improve social policies. So we began there, and for this newly created team, it was great. It was very easy to install an evidence-based culture because this was in the DNA of the new sector that was being created. The team was completely clear about it, and we create a lot of these incentives Vanessa was mentioning to really help the use of evidence. So we promote the people that use more evidence, that brings evidence to the discussion table, and that changes the way in which this sector was seen within the public sector, because we were, the modern, the technical team, we were also political, but for this purpose, we were using this issue of having a culture of using evidence in all the processes, and to have evidence to support all the decisions we were adopting. So at that level, worked great, but we need to remember it was creating a culture, creating a new institution, and that was easy. Prior to becoming a minister, I spent 20 years in a think tank, so I knew how to do this. So at that level, perfect, easily, smoothly usage of evidence, installing a culture that really is based on evidence was great and easy. The problem came when we need to, with this newly created entity, we received 5 major social programs that were already working in some other sector within the public sector, and they were transferred to this new sector. And they had to fit in this newly created culture. So we received 5 very large programs. For example, the conditional cash transfer program was transferred to us. And that was, where the problems began. We received a program with 1,500 people working there for more than 5 or 6 years, and now we want to reshape how they work. We were not intended to change the program in its essence, but we need to really address how to change the culture of this, of how they were doing things, especially on the role of evaluations, evidence, and the using external knowledge and sharing knowledge among them. In other programs, we decide, when we receive all the programs, we did for 6 months a very rapid evaluation of each of them to align them and to identify what things we need to change. And one of the commonalities in all the 5 programs we received is none of them were using evidence for anything. None of them had an impact evaluation. None of them had personnel really prepared to deal with knowledge sharing, with using evidence or creating evidence. So then the problems began. That was completely different from the story I just told you about this newly created high-level institution. Then when you go to the ground with pre-existing institutions, then you have to deal with existing culture there. And changing that culture is a completely different story and a completely different challenge. And that has to do with something that Vanessa didn't mention, but it's included, I think, in the motivations she was talking about, is we need to understand, to really understand the culture of these institutions, the fears of the public servants. And for most of the people working in the social programs we received, they were completely scared of having more information shared, because that will be an open door to evaluate their work. Not the results, not the program, their specific personal individual work. And with that, they thought that that was completely scary. So it's really, really complex to change the culture of this pre-existing institution. So I think we need to have a real good assessment of what is in the culture we are trying to include these evidence-based policies, evidence-based analysis, knowledge sharing, to really think on how to improve this culture. So I think I'll leave it there and we'll go for questions.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Very, very interesting. And I think you somehow we don't have just one culture there, right? To assess and to read, and how a new state agency, department or area with the best people and ready and convinced about how to do that has to play with and interact with those that were there for a long time and used to do it things in some way. I didn't have time to mention that, but within what we define as openness to change, the fear of failure and the degree of critical thinking, which many times is really low within these agencies, plays a very important role in terms of not being open to being challenged. And of course, this is also linked with incentives, like how people are usually evaluated and rewarded, and the fear of course, if I if I show up or the results, if I have an impact evaluation being performed or another sort of evaluation and the results are not good, how will I hold my position, right? And if there's not a learning environment where these chance of failure is something that has no direct consequences, I don't mean that it doesn't have to have consequences, but of course that public policies are very complex and there's no one responsible for them. But this also, of course, plays sometimes against perceptions or what has to do with how each policymaker or each program is perceived by the public. So it's very difficult to create probably a culture that admits failure, where politicians and most of the electoral incentives are against that. I have a lot of cases where policymakers come forward and explain why a certain public policy did not work out well, and how, with what evidence they will make the changes, and public will be our beneficiaries, or the targeted stakeholders will be happy with that. So I think this is a complex problem. Let me start with some questions, and I see people typing there, and everyone is invited to take advantage of Carolina's presence and story right now. Within this setting that you found among other policymakers and bureaucrats being part of these programs, did you find any entry points or any ways on to try to work out with these fears and build maybe a way of working where finding problems in the programs was not that bad, but as being perceived as a way forward to enhance or to change, or maybe, I don't know, the degree, of course, of changes that would have to be made. But any entry points or ways that one can work with when you find a stable with a large story of how things are done?
Yeah, let me go.
Is it possible?
It is possible, but it requires midterm commitment to do so, and a long-term goal, actually. And one important thing is to work out the culture against failure within the public sector. Because if you fail,
yes,
that means that you are misusing public resources. You did it wrong. You use the money of the taxpayers for something that is not working, that's not doing the job. And given that, you cannot fail, because if you fail, you are committed you're having an offense to the system. So we need to change that. And to change that, you need to introduce failure as part of the learning process. And that's the only way failure is acceptable. Acceptable not only by the person who is accepting that something is not working, but accepted by the system. If you identify a failure and then you propose a solution and a way of measuring if that solution is reaching better results, then if you introduce that within the system, then failure is allowed. And for that, you need to change these bureaucratic arrangements in which all these public servants work to allow this to happen. And then when you begin, providing incentives to the team to really identify one failure and propose one solution, and you celebrate that we are facing one problem and achieving that solution, that helps a lot to begin this process of change. But it's not easy. It's not easy because the specific individual that identifies a failure probably is showing that other people were not identifying it or were not doing the job properly or never thought about it. So it's a tense moment, but we need to change the scope of how we see failure within the public sector. I think that's a key issue to really begin changing this culture. The second thing is that you need to show public servants that evidence, knowledge also protect them. Protect them from all these common sense attacks. Don't give money to the poor in cash because they will spend it in alcohol. Well, if you have a study that shows that there's no evidence to support that affirmation, then you can go to the news, you can make a case, you can be in the media, you can talk to other policymakers, you have something to protect. So you need this combination, allowing failure within the system and also showing that using evidence, it's really, really, really helping you to bring in ways of valuing evidence within this bureaucratic culture that we face in most of our public sectors.
Excellent point. And I think that this the concrete example as a baby step, right? Like maybe start with one and see what you learn from admitting one failure and having a team work around it makes a lot of sense. That when we're talking about this failure, I don't think it's a cultural issue only in state agencies. I think it's really applicable to all of our fields. I could think about a lot of donor-funded programs where it would be very difficult for those being for the donor to admit failure. So it's something within our culture in general so strong that probably, as you were saying, time frame is very important, and to really change this will take a long time. But a combination of this mix of finding good ways to come up with evidence to protect the decisions that you are making or to explain them, to protect yourself about why, and also creating some sort of safe spaces where gradually people can bring on some failures and work together to come up with solutions. It's not failure, right? It's framing the failure, and we are learning, as you were saying, and we're finding new solutions, and we want to do it better. Of course, in the case of state agency, to be accountable for the public and the taxes, I think it brings a complexity, and it makes it more difficult, right, to say, as you were mentioning, we failed.
Yeah, actually, there are problems too, because in the case of the Ministry of Development and Social Inclusion, when we received 5 programs after having this first rapid evaluation, we asked for specific studies in certain programs. And by the end of the first semester, we decided to close one program. For the first time in the Peruvian history, we closed a social program because it was not doing, it was not achieving any results, and it was full of corruption and creating a lot of problems. And that was highly seen from the outside as the potential bad usage of evidence. We had evidence to support our decision, but the political discussion about using that evidence to support the closing of a program was not in the good side of using evidence to support policies. I think we did it right, but
right, there are different uses too.
Yeah, and a lot of people attacked why you are basing your decision in these 5 studies. That's not enough, or that's not good, or they're, not completely independent voices here, and so that was a very tricky situation.
Indeed. I see some comments coming here. I think that Carolina answered, right? Or I think with some stories about what she was doing.
We have a couple of documents that we published after I left the ministry with 2 colleagues, and they are in the webpage of Instituto de Estudios Peruanos. I will send you in the chat the links of those
you
documents.
Have the links?
They have versions in English. So one is about how we create and what were the principles and the doubts and the main questions when we create this new sector. And the other one is about what was the process of designing new interventions, piloting, evaluating, then piloting again, and then evaluating again to really get to a final design of how social interventions could be adopted by this newly created sector.
Excellent. Oh, it's awesome that you had the time and resources to systematize that. I'm sure that everyone here will be interested in reading those documents. So thanks. If you don't have the links accessible, don't worry that we send the presentation, the recorded version to everyone.
Okay.
And we can attach. Yes, we will be in touch with you and send everyone those documents as well. Here we have Trivelli also sharing that they had a similar experience on merging sectors in Ghana, when the Ministry of Women and Children Affairs was transformed into gender, children and social protection. I think that especially in this in the social sector, this is quite frequent, right? Where you have to bring on more actors, and it's like a new organizational culture just because this merger is taking place and people coming from different ways of doing things come together. Right? Yes. Maybe in some other ministries that's not that frequent, but in the social sector, and probably this also links up with all the coordination issues, right? Among different state agencies, which for social protection is so important.
Yeah, and the problem there is that you don't share the same evidence that with the other sectors you need to coordinate. And then sometimes language is not very helpful.
Exactly. Yeah, they have different ways, or some that are even. I remember in Santa Fe province in Buenos Aires, who have a case there too, where they created a social cabinet and they brought everyone together from different ministries, and there were very different levels of data collection, how they were analyzed and used, and sometimes in some cases even no collection of data at all. So that brings, of course, another opportunity also to start working towards more integrated systems to produce evidence within the state. Here we have here a question about yes, Gladys is adding to what you were saying about the use of evidence, that this brings the questions about what type of evidence is valuable or valid. Any thoughts about how values or beliefs play out there in assessing what sort of evidence is really valid to base policy decisions, such as canceling a program?
Yeah, values are key, and you know, for an institutional setting that is being created, newly created, you can set what are your desired values and try to fulfill that promise, because you're creating something. But when you receive or when you are part of an existing institution, you have to understand the pre-existing values. And in the best of the cases, I would say you can introduce additional values, but in a very long-term process. And you have to be very wise in doing that, because conflicting values is something that could really destroy an institution.
Right, and long-term is not, it's not a good a friend with politics, right?
No.
Long-term, what's that? Very difficult. Trivelli is here interested in exploring a little bit better about how you kept all sectors working in your situation, like for instance, the gender, right, equality work that gets overshadowed by other social sectors because of incentives.
Actually, in our public sector, we have like two transversal issues, where gender and interculturality, and those were really transversal to all the sectors, and were you had to adopt them in a transversal way. The most conflicting and problematic issues were how to begin finding really effective instruments to not only adopting these transversal issues, but working with other sectors in an efficient manner. Because you sit with another minister and you agree that you need to provide water and sanitation for the poor. Yeah, great. But then you have to go to the people that is doing budgeting and planning in that sector to coordinate with the person doing budgeting and planning within your sector. And then if they have different cultures, if they have different priorities, it's not a question even about the money or the budget, but about priorities of ways of working, and that's very difficult to align. I would say that's highly complicated. Adopting some common policies is not a big issue if you have the right policies, for sure. Yeah. But allowing these small coordinations and building instruments to make that happen, it's completely different.
Yeah, and that will probably take a lot of time. Do you think that there's like a trend towards integrating those processes better, or are ministries in general working in silos?
Most of the states are design sectoral, and that's a big problem, because problems are not sectoral. Problems are comprehensive, holistic. So the thing is that I think we are very, very far away from having good coordination instruments that really are effective, other than getting together and signing an agreement that we have very good intentions and we will try to do it together. But coordinating, I think, is the most toughest part of public management.
Agree. But there are emerging systems and mechanisms for that as well. I think that gradually we will see more of those, as they are difficult, but the awareness of its importance also is increasing. So hopefully there will be enough energy to start pushing towards that direction, right?
Yeah, we need a lot of innovation there. No, we need a lot of innovation there, I think, because we are not there yet. We don't know how to do it, actually. We don't have
that's true.
The gold standard yet. So.
Right, but I think there's again a space to share or to try to systematize first attempts to do that. To really, I think there are. I am aware of some local experiences in terms of coordination. I think we don't have the knowledge out there also to build upon. So yes, it's very green, but there are some seedlings there, or some sprouts that we should at least take a look at and learn from.
Exactly. There are
That's
examples
something,
around the
yeah.
world, but they are few and mostly in relatively small scales. So I think we still
That's true.
do
Or
a
at
lot more.
the provincial level or subnational level. That's true. Yes. Well, but it's a start, right? It's a start. Here, we have only 5 minutes to close, but I have here a final question from Leandro. He was saying that he's mentioning that our framework follows a systemic approach. So we think that the different components, these 5 dimensions of can be understood in terms of relationships with each other, rather than just looking at culture or management and processes in an isolated manner. Within the other dimensions of our framework, he's asking, like organizational capacity, management and processes and resources. Which of those do you think will have more influence in an organization's culture? I think that culture maybe eats up the other ones.
Yeah, it's. I think all of them actually. The problem is you need everything. You know, to make the system work, you need all the pieces working. It's not that you can say, well, I will concentrate in, you know, organizational capacity, and that will solve and bring the other things into place. I don't think that it's that easy. I think, as most problems in the world, we need everything to be done nicely at the same time, in the same moment, in the same place, and with the same objective. So I don't think you can really say what's better.
I agree. Virtuous clusters. I increasingly think about clusters, right? Where these things are like coming up together in some way and try to shed water into those clusters when there are some degree of alignment. Of course, that within organizational capacity, we include leadership, and within our framework, that the role of leadership emerged throughout these dimensions as being so important in terms of making changes. If you don't have, like a set of policymakers who are convinced about change, and then, as you were saying, change needs to take into account the different dimensions, but this is not going to happen probably. Within leadership with political willingness, of course, as a starter. Then, as you were mentioning, you have to work with what's been there for a long time too. Okay, I see here one before closing up. Clara is also sharing a last thought about some part of the literature suggests that it's better to promote change by focusing on the problems that people really care about, rather than focusing on, okay, let's see how we improve the use of evidence in itself. So would you agree with that? Do you think that?
Yeah, I just answered in the chat. I think that using evidence is a tool. It's a tool to really address better the problems, to help better people. It's not that evidence by evidence. We don't care about that. We care about using this evidence to really help to address better the problems that people are facing, and to address them in a more efficient way, because we have scarce resources. People, money, time are very scarce to address all the problems we need to really be working on. So evidence, it's a tool. That's it. And if we use it better, the better. If we don't use it, our problem, we will stay where we are.
Great ending, Carolina. Thank you very much. It has been very enlightening to hear you and to learn about how things that we usually talk about from a more theoretical standpoint really have a sense on the ground, and without taking out the complexity. In fact, within our implications, we have a whole set of implications that have to do with how to deal with complexity and better embrace it. And this systemic approach really requires from us being able to avoid leaving complexity out of the table and taking, like linear approaches that just focus on some parts of it. So thank you again. It has been a pleasure. Let me now end up with a very brief sharing of what's next. We have our fourth webinar coming up in January. Please pencil it out. We would be happy to have you again on board. That's on January the 17th at the same time. And there we will explore the role of management and processes ranging from planning to budgeting and monitoring and evaluating. We'll have ODI and DEA from South Africa sharing a very specific experience on how to assess and set up new management and processes to better incorporate the use of evidence in policy. So 2 great speakers there again. Hope to have you on board. Hope you have enjoyed this webinar. As I was mentioning, we will have the recorded version. We will share it by email with the PowerPoint presentation and the documents that Caroline mentioned that I'm sure would be of high interest for all of you. So thank you very much for all participants for being present. We hope to have you on board in about a month again. And with that, goodbye and until next time. Hi, and I see here Nicole. Yes, we also have summaries on our blogs. The recorded versions of each webinar are sent. You can request for them, but we also publish them, the summary, on Politics and Ideas webpage. So yes, this knowledge will be going around in different ways in the future. Thanks for that, and that's our site where you can find also webinar 1 and 2. Thank you very much.